Hello and welcome to the Liverpool.com podcast. I'm James Martin, joined today by Matt Addison, and we'll be talking all things US tour with the squad now having touched down in Pittsburgh. Before we dive into that though, a message from NordVPN. To get the best discount off your NordVPN plan, go to nordvpn.com/bloodred. Our link will also give you 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. There's no risk with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the podcast episode description box. Right, so touchdown in the US, as we say. It'll be the first chance for us to see, well, Arne Slot's Liverpool, I suppose. They have played a match behind closed doors against Preston, but, cluing the behind closed doors name there, we haven't seen it. Nobody's seen it except for a select few members of Arne Slot's staff and all that. So this will be the first public outing of the new look Liverpool side, the first Liverpool team sent out by someone other than Jurgen Klopp in, coming up to 8-9 years now, which is a bit crazy to think about, but very exciting all the same. And we have picked out a few things to watch out for on what will be the most interesting pre-season, I think it's fair to say, in many a year because of all of those new elements. So I suppose that the place to start is in sort of semi-generic terms with the formation before we go into specific players, because as I say, new manager, new coaches. We know that Slot's touched upon the formation in his press conference, saying that it's not so much a 4-2-3-1; it's closer to the 4-3-3 we're used to. But what are you expecting, Matt? Do you think it'll be noticeably different in any kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I'm excited to see Liverpool play again. It feels like a long time now. It feels like the right time for them to come back, and I think it will be interesting to see what the nuances are. If it is a 4-3-3, it's not necessarily going to be exactly the same as what it was. I think Liverpool's squad is definitely set up for it to be similar-ish. It's been a while now since we've seen them. So I'd like to think it's going to be sort of broad brushstrokes similar to what it was under Jurgen Klopp, because I think that basically is what this Liverpool squad is suited. It's what it's built to be, really. It's one number 6 and then 2 slightly more advanced number 8s on either side. And, as we've spoken about in the past few weeks, there's been, certain conversations around, Curtis Jones or Ryan Gravenberch and where do these players fit in. But the where do they fit in question for me is more a case of the pecking order and who is in that starting 11 first. I don't think we're necessarily going to see a dramatic change in the position that Harvey Elliott plays, or Dominic Szoboszlai suddenly doing something completely different. I think this Liverpool team is set up to be a continuation. It's just those little tweaks and little nuances. I think we'll start to get a bit of an idea over the next week or so.
Yeah, I think the pecking order is one of those few things we might have to wait a little while on, because of course, as we've talked about a lot, Slot is missing up to 11 first team players with the various international tournaments that have gone on, the Copa America and the Euros, and Liverpool players going deep in those. So, some big names not back yet. Slot will have to navigate the US tour without them, or at least without some of them. There are reports that some of the ones who went out a little bit earlier on could be joining up with the team in the US before the end of the tour. But certainly in terms of the party that's travelled out there, it's missing quite a lot of big names and ones who you'd expect to be pretty comfortably in Slot's first choice starting 11 once they're settled in and back into the swing of things. But that certainly doesn't mean, as you say, that there's nothing to read into this tour. I think it's a really fascinating time for the club, and I think it's worth looking at some of those individuals as well. You touched on a couple there with Harvey Elliott in particular. He's not even really a young player anymore. He's sort of a senior member of the squad, but in terms of the absences of other senior players, you look at the ones coming through who could almost be looking at Elliott as an example, and ones who could be looking to stake their claim in this new era. Who have you sort of got your eye on from the travelling party who could maybe step up in a way that we haven't seen before?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to sort of pick out certain ones in terms of who's going to emerge out of nowhere. I think we're fairly familiar now, aren't we, with the 28 players that have been there. Most of them have played for Liverpool before. In the case of even someone like Harvey Blair, who's slightly more obscure, I suppose, in terms of the knowledge of most Liverpool fans, we have seen him play for the first team a couple of years ago. So don't think there'll be any massive shocks. I think a lot of those players, probably Harvey Blair included, are there more because the other senior players are not there. There's not loads of other senior forward options for Liverpool to pick from at the moment. So I think it will be interesting to see, obviously, Harvey Elliott that I've mentioned, Ryan Gravenberch. It's a bit of a shame that he's not there to begin with. He might be one of those that joins up midway through, but I think it's an important period for him. He obviously missed last season because he was still at Bayern for the summer and then came in relatively late in the window for Liverpool. I think there's a few players that you think can benefit, Curtis Jones maybe being one of those, just in terms of having the full summer to work with the new manager and see where they go from here. But I'm not expecting any massive shocks. I think Arne Slot will come in and do broadly what Jurgen Klopp did in terms of that pecking order. If it was up to me, I'd like to see Curtis Jones and Harvey Elliott probably start the first game of the season. It'll be interesting to see sort of how much they can benefit from having the full summer compared to, say, Gravenberch or whoever else it is that comes in late in terms of those positions. But the midfield is definitely what I'm looking at the most. I'm sure there'll be plenty of conversations around what might happen with Cody Gakpo or who might be the first choice centre back alongside Virgil van Dijk. But I think the midfield is probably the most interesting aspect of all of it, really, for me, I think.
Yeah, I'm interested in terms of what he does with the midfield, looking a little bit longer term. But when we look at the tour, for me, I think the attack could be where we see some of those youngsters sort of make an impression because, of course, the options are limited. You look at those tournaments we mentioned and the ones who will be away. We have Darwin Núñez, he got to the semi-finals of the Copa America. Then, of course, there's Diogo Jota, who might be joining up, I think, because he did go out of the Euros a little earlier than some others, but he won't be available from the start. Cody Gakpo, again, went pretty far. Could be joining up, but won't be there at first. And Luis Diaz went all the way to the final of the Copa America. So if you look at the sort of selection of 5 senior Liverpool forwards, the only one who's around is Mohamed Salah, who we'll talk about in just a second. But before we get to him, you look at, I'll mention some of those young attackers. You touched upon Harvey Blair, which would be a real wild card. It would be a surprise, it has to be said, to see him sort of claim a squad spot for the current season. But a good pre-season could set him up for a good loan potentially. It may be one that sort of alters his career trajectory to a certain extent, even if, as I say, it would be a shock to see him play any real part in the immediate future for Liverpool. But someone who has more of a chance of making that step up is someone like a Ben Doak, who we're all very eager to see because no one's really seen him play much football at all for the best part of a year with injury troubles. He was included in the provisional squad for the Euros for Scotland, but was forced to withdraw from that through that same injury. But he's training with Liverpool now, looks to have shaken that off. So that will be a really interesting to watch in the States, how he gets on. But yeah, we'll circle back to Salah now because we know we'll be seeing him in the US. But I suppose the question is where we'll be seeing him, because some reports out of that behind closed doors game that he was playing through the middle as a striker. I know I've sort of touched upon this as an option in previous podcasts on here because I don't really see that he fits the mould of a kind of classic slot winger at Feyenoord. He had these very explosive, pacey players, something Salah's arguably never been, but certainly hasn't been for the last couple of years. He's more of a wide playmaker, if you like. So do you think that we'll be seeing more of Salah through the middle in the US? And if so, do you think it's just because of the lack of options, or do you think it's a viable option as we sort of head into the main campaign?
I think it is probably mainly just to do with a lack of other options at the moment. I'm not necessarily convinced that it'll be something we see a lot next season, but it is something I'd like to see. I think it doesn't necessarily have to be as a number 9, although if it's a 4-3-3, you're not going to see him play as a number 8, so maybe that makes more sense. But he's obviously played as a 10 for Egypt. He's, as you say, as much a playmaker as a goal scorer now, really, isn't he? He's very much up there in terms of the very best creators. I think I'm right in saying he created the most XG for his teammates out of anyone in the Premier League last season, with the finishing maybe letting him down in terms of getting a few more assists on the board. So he is definitely a player that I think maybe doesn't quite have the explosiveness that he had in terms of his pace and beating a player that he did when he first came into Liverpool, but at the same time, he's a lot more refined in terms of his finishing. He can finish all types of goals. I think pretty much if he goes through one-on-one, he's going to score, whereas obviously I don't want to keep picking on him, but Darwin Núñez, I think you've got a 50-50 chance at best, really. You could either do something incredible and chip the goalkeeper or hit the corner flag, and you don't really know what you're going to get. I think Mohamed Salah is very much still 100% the one that you would want to be in those positions most often. So I can definitely see the argument for, if he's your most reliable finisher, getting him as close to the goal and keeping him in the penalty area for as long as possible is, a logical tactical decision to have come to. So it's something I would like to see. I think the only thing that maybe stops me from thinking it will be, a permanent thing or a regular thing next season is more, I'm not quite sure who would play off the right if it's not him. There's obviously more options to play off the left and through the centre, so it's probably a little bit too congested to make him a number 9 full time, unless there's a signing that comes in who maybe plays off that right hand side. I think that's probably the biggest thing that will stop it from happening regularly.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think without any transfer business, it's more or less a non-starter. You could look at maybe playing someone like Luis Diaz or Diogo Jota over there. They've both done it in sort of spare very long, but you think if you have Mohamed Salah on the books, then you'll keep him where he's been one of the best players in the world for the last 5 years, rather than trying one of those two more or less out of position. So yeah, I think it would need a specialist to come in, or I suppose as a slightly longer shot, a specialist to emerge from the ranks in pre-season. I suppose Cade Gordon is another one you could mention. I think I'm right in saying that he does have the right wing as sort of his natural role. I think he's left-footed, which allows him to sort of cut in much the same way as Salah does. I'm sure you'll correct me if I'm wrong there, but he's one who, again, we've not seen, well, for even longer than Doak, really, because he's had a bit of an injury nightmare. But we know that Liverpool still has very high hopes for him. He's still only 19 years of age, and yeah, I mean, it was not super long ago in the grand scheme of things that Liverpool almost doubled down on their investment, because Derby, when they were going through that financial trouble, Liverpool sort of helped them out / took advantage of it, whichever way you want to spin it, by buying out the sell-on clause that Derby had on Cade Gordon to sort of. Which was, a statement of kind of intent of where they saw his career going, that they wanted that kind of 100% of any future sale. They know his potential is sky high. So very exciting to see him again. But again, I suppose you'd probably agree that it would be surprising to see him kind of stake a claim for first team minutes heading into the season.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't put him in the same bracket as a Harvey Blair. I think he's definitely closer to a Ben Doak in terms of that next step. I'd probably have him in there with Bobby Clark as well, in terms of, obviously Clark is injured, so it's a bit of a shame for him that he's not able to go on that US tour. But I think for Doak, Gordon and Clark, from what we saw, certainly in the second half of last season, but the entirety of it really for 2 out of those 3, obviously Gordon was injured for the first section of the season. I think they're definitely far too good for under-21s football every single week, but they're maybe not quite at the level that you need to be for Liverpool. So I know Liverpool don't tend to do loans as much as some of the other clubs do for the players that they have the highest hopes for. When you think of Curtis Jones, obviously Elliott did go, but he had to kind of make that case and push for it a little bit. I think there's definitely a case with a couple of those, particularly with, when you mentioned their Doak before and obviously Gordon as well. It's not just a case of, they're both ready for senior minutes. For them both to get those senior minutes at Liverpool, I think would be tricky. So I think even if you kept one of them around, that would then have a knock-on effect for the other. So I'd definitely be looking at a loan, I think, for both of those players, and just see, which one draws the interest from the club that Liverpool think is most suited to the next phase of their development. But yeah, very, very exciting. I'm really interested to see what Cade Gordon can do this summer. I'm a big fan of him. To come back from, I think, 19 or 20 months on the sidelines to then come back as strong as what he did. Captain in the under-21s at the back end of last season. He's a really, really good player. He's at least as talented as Ben Doak. I'd put them in the same category, I think, heading into this summer. And yeah, it'll be really fascinating to see kind of how sharp he looks. In some ways, there might be a little bit of an advantage almost to having, built up his fitness towards the back end of last season. He can almost hit pre-season fit and firing, whereas Ben Doak might still be, making his way back. But yeah, both hugely talented wingers.
Yeah, definitely one of the more exciting elements of this tour. I was reading this morning, and you can read it in the Liverpool.com transfer live blog, in fact, that there's some interest in Cade Gordon from the Championship, 5 clubs apparently, who are taking a look there. And there were 2 or 3 of them named, I think. West Brom was definitely one of them. I think Preston might have been as well, which Liverpool have used before. The Sepp Vandenberg has spent time there, for example. So an interesting one to watch. And now that I've sort of accidentally segued into Sepp Vandenberg, we can talk about him next, because he's probably another one of the main talking points of this US tour. He's one, again, because of absences and things like that, we're expected to see get a lot of minutes. He played in that behind closed doors friendly against Preston once again, as the Preston links keep on coming. But he's looked good by all accounts behind the scenes. He looked good last season in a struggling Mainz team. We've seen some transfer links. I think Mainz wanted to keep hold of him. I think Wolfsburg has expressed an interest as well. And then there's PSV back in the Netherlands have been mentioned as well. So, a good sort of money spinning sale is one option. But given that Liverpool have been talking about maybe needing one more body in the defence anyway, is it one where we could see him step up? And is that something that we'll sort of know more about by the end of the tour, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a massive surprise to me that he's not gone anywhere so far. I mean, Liverpool want £20 million for him, which I think is probably optimistic. It does feel a bit like Nat Phillips, where they kept him a little bit longer than necessary because the valuation was probably a little bit too high. But at the moment, obviously, Liverpool only have Jarell Quansah, who is there among the senior centre-backs. There's still, obviously others to come back, but they're still on holiday for the time being. So it makes sense to have kept him around. It makes sense as well in just a sense of Arne Slot will want to take a look at him. There's obviously been, a development in him. I think just looking at the pictures this morning of Liverpool flying into America, walking around the town and things, you can see how physical and tall that he is compared to some of the other players. The suggestion is that he's come back, a little bit faster and maybe a bit more explosive in terms of the physical qualities that he's got. So he's definitely someone to watch out for, I think, on this tour. I think the fact that he was so strong in his comments at the start of the summer about wanting to go and, Liverpool, I can't remember the exact words that he used, but he was essentially saying that Liverpool was stopping him from developing his career because the price was too high. So I think when you come out that strongly, it will be, it will be quite a U-turn to come back into the team and make yourself a key member of the squad. He probably fits the category of, it might be the right time for him to move on, but Liverpool will want a decent fee. You mentioned PSV interest in him. The suggestion, at least in the Netherlands, is that they'd be prepared to pay a club record fee for him, which, it's not mega money. It will be somewhere between 15 million that they paid for a player whose name escapes me last summer, but somewhere between that and the 20 that Liverpool want. I think, look, it's not massive money compared to some of the Premier League spending and Liverpool spending, but I do think it says quite a lot really about how much he's developed as a player. I think most people, when he went out on a couple of loans, when he was at Preston, he was playing as a wing back. He's obviously been at Mainz. I think most Liverpool fans have probably written him off in terms of his future at Anfield at least, but for PSV, which is obviously a huge club in his homeland, to be prepared to break their transfer record, I think that probably tells its own story in terms of how well he's done and how highly rated he is. Whether he's at Liverpool's level, I'm not too sure, but I'm sure he'll get chances during the tour. But it's almost a little bit similar to one or two of the other positions, really. I think there's probably a decent chance if Van Dijk, Canate, Gomez and Quansah were all going on this US tour and they'd all been in pre-season from day one, maybe Liverpool would have been a little bit more willing to let Sepp go a little bit earlier on.
Yeah, and of course 15 million is 15 million that you can put towards a first-team signing. It's not massive money, but as you say, it's good business if it can happen in terms of what he came in for, which was a much smaller fee, sort of 5-6 times smaller, if I remember that correctly. It wasn't a big deal. I think he came from Pek Zwolle in the Netherlands, something along those lines. But Yeah, it would be good business, and it's the exact kind of business that Michael Edwards was, of course, renowned for in his first spell at the club. Ryan Brewster is the one that springs to mind, but these deals add up if you can sort of get that conveyor belt going of selling young talent. You don't want it to be the only thing you do with young talent, because there are ones who are good enough to go into the team, and you don't want to be in a position like Chelsea have been in so many times over the years with Salah, with Kevin De Bruyne. Incredible that, the Premier League's two best players by a distance over the last half decade were on the books at Chelsea and were allowed to go. That's not something Liverpool would want to happen. But yeah, there's no suggestion really that's a fear with Van den Berg. But I think I'm probably more intrigued by him in terms of what we'll see on the US tour than maybe you are. I think you're right in terms of the comments you made maybe change the equation. It is hard to see how he stays at Liverpool and plays a useful role when that's where his head is at. But in terms of, ability alone, I think what we could see on the US tour is that he is someone who could slot into that, fourth in the pecking order type position at Anfield. And again, to go to our go-to talking point on this podcast, there will be a lot of games in the new season. There's the expanded Champions League. I've beaten you to it this time. Yeah, I think if he could make his peace with it, I think there's a way where he could stay at Liverpool and get minutes and aid his development well. But yeah, it's just a case of where his head's at in the next few weeks. Maybe getting minutes in pre-season sort of changes things, working with Arne Slot. Maybe there's a change in his attitude. We've not actually heard anything from him for a little while. He sort of came out with those strong quotes, and then that was sort of it for a little bit. So one to watch, I think. But yeah, I'm certainly interested to see how he gets on in the US, where, as you say, it'll probably be him and Kwanzaa for a good chunk of the time, given the available options. So certainly one to keep an eye on. Just before we finish up, I suppose the other thing is looking at Arne Slot himself. We haven't really seen Slot, the head coach, yet. We've seen pictures from training. We've seen, a few clips here and there. And of course, we've had the introductory press conference, but that's about it. This will be the first time we see him in action on the sidelines, sort of shouting to the team. I suppose that'll be best for the people over there in the US getting to watch the games, but we'll maybe pick up a bit of it as well from LFC TV, where you can watch the games. So we'll certainly be keeping an eye on that. Is there anything in particular you're sort of on the lookout for, or anything you're intrigued to see in terms of his kind of mannerisms, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be easy to work it out, but I am intrigued to see sort of how he deals with how big a club Liverpool is. I think that there's been plenty of stories of, David Moyes going to Manchester United and going away. I can't remember whether it was to America. I think it might have been actually to Asia somewhere, where he kind of went and was completely overwhelmed and couldn't believe how big Manchester United was. I think this will be different for Arne Slot. I think he will have some idea of what the size of Liverpool is and how big it is in all parts of the world, and how much scrutiny and how much sort of fanfare comes with that. But I do think that is something that he's going to have to get used to quickly, and it'll be interesting to see sort of, how he is with, the interviews, the various bits of media that he's got to do. I think he's had to do a fair bit already, but it's only just begun. I'm sure, Jurgen Klopp will have told him what to expect with, as we say, the Champions League matches coming back and all the rest of it. He's going to have a press conference almost every other day. There's times where he sees the journalists more than his players. And I think that there will be, an adjustment to be made. He's come from a big club in Feyenoord, as he's made clear quite a few times. But I think it's fair to say Liverpool is a completely different level to that. So that's the main thing, I think, for me, is just sort of how he comes across when he speaks to the press, and sort of the interviews that he does, the interactions that he has with fans whilst he's over there. It'll just be interesting to sort of get to know him a little bit, almost in that sense, and see what he's like and how he handles it, and the kinds of messages that he comes out with. I think he was a little bit guarded at the start of his press conference that he did when he was unveiled. He kind of warmed up a little bit as he went along. So I think that's the main thing for me, is just to sort of get a little bit more of an insight into his character, if you like, see what he's like as a person, see how he is with the training sessions. I'm sure there'll be, open sessions that people will be able to watch and things like that. So yeah, it's new for everyone, but I think it'll be intriguing to see kind of how he handles it and how he deals with it.
And we'll see the resumption of his rivalry with Erik ten Hag, of course. It could be setting the tone. I was going to say for years to come. It might only be for months to come. You'll never know. But ten Hag has held on to that job for the time being. So who knows? They'll start the season as Liverpool and Manchester United managers, respectively. They went head-to-head in the Netherlands with Ajax and, of course, Feyenoord. Ten Hag got the best of Slot in that situation, I think, in the one season where Ten Hag was at Ajax and Slot was at Feyenoord. Ajax did the double. But then going back further to with Slot at his previous club, it was that unlikely title charge that we saw in the pandemic season. It was Slot who done the double over Ten Hag on that occasion. So it's an interesting one, and Ten Hag's maybe stoked to that rivalry a little bit with a couple of comments in recent weeks. He has been very complimentary at times. He said that Slot seems like a very good fit for Liverpool and that he's a very good coach. But at the same time, he said some sort of odd things about how Feyenoord have been overhyped and PSV were by far and away the best team in the division last season. So, yeah, interesting remarks and ones that'll maybe set the tone. But as I say, they're set to meet in the US, so that'll be interesting to see their first interaction. And then it won't be long before they meet in the Premier League. That's, I think, the 1st of September, that game has been moved to for TV. I think it was going to be the end of August, but now is that first day of September. So that'll be a date really circled in the calendars of both managers. A huge day, particularly if one of them hasn't got off to the best kind of start as well. Then that game is going to be very consequential in terms of attitudes and in Ten Hag's case, maybe in terms of his job safety if things really have got off to a rocky start. So yeah, plenty of intrigue there. That's one of the many things we'll be keeping an eye on over the course of the US tour. Of course, we will be keeping you posted with anything we spot from the games, from the training, from the press conferences, the whole lot. We'll have it over on Liverpool.com and, of course, here on the Blood Red channel as well. Matt, thanks very much for joining me for today's conversation. I've enjoyed it. And we will be back again very soon to talk more things Liverpool.